No, it cannot be!
Well, I guess we're shifting gears here then. Okay, so might as well. 1994 saw a new generation of Mega Man introduced to the masses in Mega Man X for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, where the cutesy, hokey nature of the original series was made less so, the stakes raised much higher, and the action made more intense. No longer were you a former housekeeping robot turned super fighting machine fending off against reprogrammed robots with funny names. Now you're a war machine fighting off other war machines with the future of anything worth a damn on the line. Mega Man X was and still is a fantastic video game, and people liked it on the Super Nintendo. However, in 1995, Mega Man X graced another platform for gamers to sample, and that was for the good old PC master race itself. Mega Man X for MS-DOS comes courtesy of Rosner Labs, the same folks who brought you the Mega Man DOS games, which have a reputation for being not very good. Still, that's a feather on the cap of one Steven Rosner, who went from making that first Mega Man DOS game on his spare time to bringing one of the perennial SNES classics over to the personal computer. Now, one of these days, I may pull out those old DOS games and give them another whirl. It's been a few years. But for now, it's Mega Man X on MS-DOS, and how does that game fare? It's fine. It's playable. It's not perfect, but it works if you wanted a semi-decent port of Mega Man X at the time. Though you may need to fiddle around with some stuff to get it running well these days. Speed settings in DOSBox, joystick settings, things of that nature. There was a lot of external fiddling that I had to do to get the game running in a semi-playable state because it wasn't made for modern computers with faster CPUs and stuff. This is stuff you wouldn't have to do if you were playing this back in the day on a semi-competent IBM PC and compatible running MS-DOS version 6.0 or whatever the current version was at the time. This is the sort of thing you do to get this running on your DOSBox today. And if fiddling around with settings to get the game playable in some form or fashion sounds like fun, then have at it. But for everyone else, and I'm gonna get this out of the way, the Mega Man X Legacy Collection available for most modern consoles, and it's on Steam especially right now at the moment, it is the ideal, not to mention most convenient way to go if you want to sample some Mega Man X. But setting aside that piece of business, as far as this MS-DOS iteration of Mega Man X is concerned, once you get it running in a tolerable state, it's fine. Definitely a step above the earlier Mega Man DOS games, which honestly doesn't take much, but nowhere close to the level of quality of the SNES original, which, to be honest, shouldn't be much of a surprise, especially to those who have had their fair share of PC ports of popular console games at the time. Despite that, however, I got this running, so might as well give it a look, shall we? So a refresher for those who have not played Mega Man X. Try to keep up. So you play as X, you start off on an intro stage to learn the ropes, and then you get the traditional stage select with 8 Mavericks that you can tackle in any order. You gain weapons by killing bosses, and you use those weapons to kill other bosses in a certain order, and you can also acquire sub-tanks for energy reserves, heart containers to extend your life meter, and armor pieces to upgrade your abilities by seeking these out throughout the game's 8 initial levels. Clearing said levels then lets you tackle 4 more stages before eventually facing off against the Maverick Emperor himself, Sigma. Everyone got that? Good. So like I said, Mega Man X on DOS is playable to a degree, even once everything's been fixed and stuff. There's an option of adjusting the speed of the game, which I imagine worked better back in the day. There's also an option to customize your button mapping for your keyboard or your gamepad or whatever the case may be, which is nice, adjusting the controls depending on your control device and your preferences. There are some differences between this DOS port and the SNES original that drastically altered the experience somewhat, and sometimes for the worse. The first thing one will notice is that X controls differently. His jumping isn't quite as smooth, and wall jumping is somewhat problematic, especially if you're doing a dash wall jump, which seems to work on a fluke every so often, which can make certain segments, and especially boss battles, more frustrating than before. Ride armors, the little mech things that you drive around, are omitted from the game. You neither ride them nor do you fight them. Not a big deal, but it does make some segments a bit barren. Enemies are faster and more aggressive as a result. Chill Penguin, for example, is an absolute bastard in MS-DOS for whatever reason, and damage seems to be a random thing. Charge shots could either do full damage or very little. The weapons don't seem as effective as in the Super Nintendo original. Storm Tornado, for example, has considerable lag. And there are some other stuff that, quite frankly, don't come to mind at the moment. So like I said, it's not perfect, and at worst, it borders on difficult in the most artificial way possible, to the point where it almost seems impossible. And Mega Man X was already a fairly challenging game from the get-go. All that said, however, this is an entirely playable version of Mega Man X, which is shocking given all I've said just now. The button customization for the keyboard and the gamepad and whatever helps a bit. The level layouts are largely the same with maybe some minute changes. The weapons mostly operate as they did before. This jump in Flame Mammoth stage to get the arm upgrade is way the fuck easier to pull off in this version than it was originally, and while jumping isn't the greatest thing ever in this game, control is otherwise functional and responsive for the most part. Also, if there is one other thing I could praise, it's the game's save system, which not only saves your progress, but also the number of lives you've acquired. And apparently it also saves the Hadouken upgrade if you've acquired it. It won't save your sub-tank energy, so you have to fill those up whenever you restart a saved game, so that's something, right? For the most part, the graphics are largely the same as the SNES original. Same sprites, same stage graphics, same intermissions and stage select screens and so on and so forth, and for what it's worth, they seem to animate well enough under the circumstances, though it's never going to be as smooth as the original version. Some details are missing from this port. The lighting effects of the intro stage, for example. Here's the SNES version for comparison, and now here's the DOS version. There's also some missing transparency effects, so the water lacks that blue hue when you're underwater. And people have mentioned that this game was more widescreen, but I think that's just the graphics being somewhat squished vertically, so everything seems fatter. Even when formatted for this video, the sprites and the graphics feel a bit bigger, and that's why you had that widescreen effect. On the audio front, well, the good news is no longer that dreaded PC speaker noise for sound effects, but rather they managed to sample the original sounds of the SNES original, and they sound, well, it's better than nothing, I suppose. The same cannot be said, however, for the music, as the rich rockin' soundtrack of Mega Man X has been reduced to a collection of MIDIs that sound somewhat poor in general. Some tunes even sound wrong and bad and just not very good. And considering this came out in 1995 and there were plenty of PC games with fantastic musical compositions in either the MIDI format or something similar, this is a bit of a letdown. Apparently there's a mod online that replaces the music, but honestly, why even bother? Overall, if there was one word that perfectly summed up Mega Man X for MS-DOS, it would be adequate. There's some stuff missing, some changes here and there, and things don't quite work as well as you'd expect them to work. But at the very least, it is playable, and it does work. For 1995 DOS standards, this wasn't too bad, and if I didn't have a Super Nintendo and I wanted a bit of that Mega Man X pie, this would have been fine. I couldn't say the same for the earlier Mega Man DOS games, so that's definitely a step up. Now trying to play it today is going to be a bit of a hassle, and quite frankly, isn't really worth it. Especially now that you have the Mega Man X Legacy collections available, which would be your ideal Mega Man experience. So for fuck's sake. You know what, I'm done. It's just like, the Mega Man X for MS-DOS, it's fine, it's playable. It's not something you need to play. The Legacy collection is just fine. And that's it. I've said my piece, so what's next on the list, huh?